So now I'm going to open this up to questions, and I have clearly a whole bunch of questions. I'm actually going to start off with questions that people asked via the sign up, and then I'm going to go to questions you guys asked here. Geoffrey asked, what's the least painful way to upgrade a Thesis 2 theme to take advantage of all of the Thesis 2.1's new features? Well, that is going to be theme by theme specific, or skin by skin specific. I mean, that is agility and Carta will be updated to take advantage of some of these things, but there will be a process for upgrading, because it's one thing to add the features of Thesis 2.1 to a 2.0 skin, and it's another thing to incorporate them into code that you may have created when you used packages, or you may have done your own HTML and stuff like that. So there's going to be perhaps I'm going to try to make it as painless as possible, but what I'll be doing is providing users an opportunity for essentially a package by package choice of upgrading. So you can choose to upgrade each package to the latest standards or not, and switch back and forth in case it breaks something on your site. There is no painless way to upgrade from Thesis Classic to Thesis Classic Responsive. The HTML is different, the CSS is different. It doesn't automatically upgrade. You simply have to recreate your site from Thesis Classic into Thesis Classic Responsive. And when you do that, you're going to want to be careful, because if you've created your own custom HTML structures, that's going to be something that's a little bit trickier. So there's no painless way to go from Classic to Classic Responsive, unless you have a very, very simple site. But the chances are you don't. So, is Classic Responsive a comparable skin compared to Agility Nude? Well, Agility and Carta have a bunch of extra custom functionality that Thesis Classic Responsive does not have. And when they are updated for 2.1, which will be shortly, they will take advantage of most of the things that Classic Responsive has, but not everything. For example, I won't be using that header image feature in my skins, because I have, if you want a single header image in your skin, I have a responsive image that allows you to, it doesn't just scale the image, you can choose which image you want based on which resolution is being displayed. And that is something that gives you quite a bit more control over your header image display. I'm going to keep that instead. The Classic Responsive does not have the responsive columns packages that Agility and Carta have, and so I believe that Agility and Carta are more full-featured than Classic Responsive, but for a simple site and for many people, maybe even most people, I think Classic Responsive is probably going to be a very useful theme for them. And if there's functionality they want in Agility, then they'll be able to switch over to Agility. Steve says he's in the middle of a major redesign of his website using Agility. Should he wait? No, I don't see why there's any reason why you should wait. The current Agility works just fine in Thesis 2.1. The only problem with current Agility, there are two problems with the current version of Agility in Thesis 2.1. And that is, first, you just have this really long list of these choices here, right? And I think some of those choices need to be moved back to the skin editor. And secondly, I had a skin options panel that does not work anymore. But it's going to be converted into this design scheme. So that's the first upgrade to Agility with 2.1, is that skin options panel will look just like this. It'll have this feature to it. So there's no reason for you to, from my perspective, there's no reason for you to bother waiting to move on to continue to work. Because Agility is going to continue to work just fine, and I will have an upgrade process in place for you. So let's see, what were the other questions that were asked in advance? Let's see, Bliss asks, does the upgrade destroy previously done work? No, it does not. Simon, I'm a newbie. What do I need to know about Thesis 2.1? Does it really empower a newbie that has not set up a blog or theme before? Well, I think it really does. You know, I can say honestly that it's been a long time since I've been in that position. And this system here seems very straightforward to me, even if you don't have any knowledge of web design or web technologies. This whole thing does seem very straightforward to me. I think the answer is yes. If you found this to be very complicated, then or complicated seeming, then maybe not, although this is as easy as it gets. I mean, I don't think anybody else out there has something that is simpler to use than this is to use for doing this kind of customization. So I do think it empowers you to do something even though you've never done one before. And actually that's really what the site's dedicated to. Although I think to get the most out of my site, you want to have to spend some time learning stuff, because that's mostly what I do, is teach people how to do stuff. Adam says, I'm hoping to have a mobile theme up and running in the next couple of months. Are there ways for me to do this with 2.1? Well, obviously, you know, classic responsive is mobile available right now. If you need something, I mean, you may want to watch Wednesday's session and Friday's session to get a fuller understanding of all of the aspects of that. But yeah, I don't see why not. And certainly all of my tools will be ready for you to use by then. Gene asks, when will 2.0 be as easy to use as 1.8? Well, I think, Gene, 2.0 is now easier to use, or 2.1 is now easier to use than 1.8. Now, you know, you have to divide up ease of use into a handful of categories. You know, 1.85 could do a bunch of simple things pretty easily. But anything complicated involved quite a bit of learning and quite a bit of work. Now, Thesis 2.1 can do almost all of the easy things that Thesis 1.8 could do, just as easily. But all of the hard stuff is way simpler in 2.0 and 2.1 than it ever was in 1.8.5. I never really fully understood why people thought that 2 was so hard. 2 was just new. It was a new way to approach designing your website. And so there were new things to learn. And what you knew in 1.8.5 didn't translate very well into 2. But anybody who did anything difficult in 1.8.5, had they taken the time to learn to use 2, they would have found it was so much simpler in 2 than it ever was in 1.8.5. Even if you were using my plugins in 1.8.5, I think it's easier to master 2 than it is to use my plugins to replicate 2. You know, there are still a bunch of people out there that use 1.8.5 and my plugins, and they can accomplish many of the things that 2 can do because of that. But I do think that if they take the time to learn how to use 2 properly, that they'll be able to do all that stuff much simpler and a more straightforward way than you could do even using my plugins. So. Susan Kidney asks, can you create customizable identity systems for marketing collateral with 2.1? And I presume what you mean by that is, can you set up accounts for customers or users to view their marketing materials? If that's what you mean, sure. Now all of that really is a WordPress function. Although because of the way Thesis 2.1 works and some of my boxes that allow you to show and hide information based on the user status. I mean, I think I have some tools that make that easier than it would be without my tools. But the ability to essentially have member accounts or customer accounts or user accounts is something that's inherent in WordPress, and Thesis fully, implements that stuff. And then Quint asks, will it work with BuddyPress? And I got to admit, I have no idea whether or not it works with BuddyPress. I heard 2.0 worked just fine with BuddyPress. I'm guessing 2.1 does, but I don't work with BuddyPress, so I don't really know. Okay, next up we're going to start taking questions from our list here. Tom Huntington asked, do I recommend downloading the beta version for the class or not? Oh, absolutely. If you've got a developer license, download the beta version and start playing with it. I would definitely do that. And my feeling is if you're in the development mode on a site right now, then I would be developing in beta. I am developing sites in beta right now. You know, I assume that by the time I'm done with the site, it's no longer going to be in beta. But the problems that the kinds of bugs that we're seeing in beta right now are so small that that I myself am not worried about it, and I would be developing sites in 2.1 beta. Tekla asks if I'm going to have a recorded version of this available for watch, and yes, you know, just like all the 2.0 launch party videos are on the site and you know, available to watch. Tomorrow we'll have a blog post posted, which is a Thesis 2.1 launch party replay, and all of the videos from the day will be on the site. Tekla asks, I got Thesis 2 for 5 sites. Can I use the information that I'm teaching for Thesis 2.1? Yeah, I mean, if your sites aren't live right now, you may as well be developing in 2.1 rather than in 2, because by the time you're done, those kinks will be worked out. Although there is no training material for 2.1 right now, so if you need to be using training materials while you're learning, then you're going to have to wait, because the only training materials that are available at the moment are the ones we're recording right now. Post displayed in 4 columns on the home page, which was real difficult in 2.0. Well, I disagree, Brian, that it was ever difficult to do in 2.0. It depends, I suppose, again, by how you define difficult. But if you're using difficult to say it was difficult to do in 1.8.5, is it difficult in 2.1? The answer is absolutely not. It's slam dunk simple to create a 4-column layout and display posts in those layouts compared to Thesis 1.8.5. And if you're using agility, then you have the built-in ability to create responsive columns, and then you use query boxes inside of those columns to place the content. And it's actually quite simple. And I'd be glad to demonstrate that sometime. So I certainly demonstrate that next week sometime, next week on a Wednesday live session, how to, you know, I mean, it's essentially an extension of the magazine-style website tutorial that we did here recently. And yes, there will be a new version of Agility and Carta, and right now we are working on a system that will not update, that won't update boxes, 2.0 boxes, 2.0 boxes to 2.1 unless the skin has been updated to 2.1. And we're in the final throes of getting that working. Can you upgrade from 2.0 to 2.1 without any further editing? Yes, you can. You won't lose anything by upgrading to 2.1 from 2.0. Now, there's no. I strongly recommend that you back your site up just in case something happens. But there's no reason why a 2.0 skin won't work reasonably well on 2.1. Susan, let's see. Okay, I'm going to come back to your question, Susan, just a second. Can you make a site like what many sites are doing with Twitter Bootstrap? They are full width of the browser window. George Kanakis asked that question. George, that's not a beginner question, right? That's not a beginner task. But yes, in fact, I know about at least one skin system that was created using Twitter Bootstrap, and there's no reason why you can't take Twitter Bootstrap and do that. But that is a web developer's job. It's definitely not a newbie, non-techie job, because Twitter Bootstrap still requires you to know an awful lot of stuff about web development and web design in order for you to accomplish it. But I do know at least of one person who's done that. I think, Jim, you probably got the answer to what if you want a different color, not just a complementary color. You just click on the thing and you can pick your color. Let's see. Angie says, I've started building a new site with agility responsive. Would I recommend switching over to the classic responsive or carry on with agility? I would stick with agility because the new agility will not, well, in the first place, agility is responsive. Whether you're in Thesis 2.1 or 2.0, it's going to stay responsive. However, responsive classic doesn't have really any of the tools that I've created in agility for making a more complex responsive website. So agility is more suited to a complex website than Thesis Classic is. Will the new agility in Carta include the new features of the Thesis Classic responsive? Most of them, not all of them, but most of them. Like I said, we won't be doing the header image, but we will do an expanded version of the color picker and stuff like that. Malcolm asks, is my training of upgrading Thesis from 1.8.5 to 2 still applicable to get us oriented and transferring to the Thesis New 2.1? Well, I'm going to teach a seminar next week. It hasn't been advertised yet, but I will teach a seminar on how to upgrade from Thesis 1.8.5 to Thesis Classic Responsive in 2.1. And I'm going to teach that next week. I'm going to show you how to do that. So that's probably a better choice. Let's see. Would the new facilities in Thesis 2.1 allow us to convert agility to Carta? Well, kind of. And we're going to talk about that more on Wednesday. We'll talk about data portability actually on Friday. Friday is when we're going to talk about data portability, about taking things between one skin and another. But I can't imagine why you would want to, but I'm open to the question. Mike Nichols says you can use the exec PHP plugin in a widget box, and yeah, you're right. You can do that inside of a text widget. Or actually not inside of a text widget. It creates its own text widget where you can put that in. And then you could put that in the widget area rather than putting that in a text box. Let's see. Steve, how to act in a second text box. Okay, Steve, I'm going to talk about stuff like that in Wednesday's session. Right? Today's session is all about how to use essentially design options, content options to customize your site where it doesn't require you to know anything about HTML or CSS. Wednesday, we're going to talk about how to use a skin editor, and we'll answer the question, how would you add a second text box or remove it from a specific template or whatever. We will be answering that question on Wednesday. Let's see. Pamela Anders says, my audio went out. Did you answer the PHP question? I think the PHP question you were asking about, Pamela, was can you put PHP in a text area? And I'm sorry, in a text box. And the answer is no, you cannot. You can only take HTML, which means that any kind of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just not PHP. Okay, let's see. How is a sidebar text box different from a text widget? Well, in many respects, it's not different at all, right? You could simply use text widgets. More advanced users will use text boxes for inserting HTML in between other boxes that needs to be inserted. In this application, and what we're doing right here, it essentially is indistinguishable from a text widget, really. But there will be times when it's a very useful tool, but those aren't times we can talk about today. Jim asks, does a slider need to be responsive? And the answer is, well, no, probably not. Although a fully non-responsive slider may have code that interferes with the responsiveness of Thesis. I mean, that's the nature of the responsive beast. So, I mean, responsive is still more complicated than non-responsive, and some things can break responsiveness, and you'll undoubtedly find some of them there someplace. But in this case, it didn't need to be responsive. John asked, does that text box work on any template? John, I think you've got a bunch of text boxes in your template, and in the template that you've been developing with me. and or I'm sorry, in the skin you've been developing with me, and it's just this. It's a text box, is a text box, is a text box. So if I have a WordPress plugin for a bunch of shortcodes, how or what do I need to do to use it in Thesis, if anything? You don't need to do anything. I mean, if you're talking about, you know, a plugin like Shortcodes that lets you wrap text in shortcodes and turns them into columns or stuff like that. All that stuff works just fine. Any kind of shortcode that worked in your content area will continue to work. And as you saw, if you want to wrap HTML in shortcodes in the text area, in a text box, that will work as well. So any shortcodes, it doesn't alter whether or not shortcodes work. It just this just happens to be a way in which shortcodes do work in 2.1. Brian asks a great question. Will Thesis continue to make big swings to where we must change our website once a year, or can we count on them after 2.2, or just making small, minor upgrades? You know, I don't have any idea. I would like to believe that that is the case. You know, everybody knew that Thesis 2 was going to be hugely different than Thesis 1.8.5 was going to be, and we all expected that. Thesis 2 had really big aspirations, and you know, that those aspirations included not needing to know any HTML and not needing to know any CSS in order to make stuff work, not having to write code. And Chris has had to retreat on some of that stuff, and so you do. You know, Thesis 2 will require, or 2.1 will require some CSS writing that 2 didn't require, which we'll talk about on Wednesday. But the HTML system, I would like to think, is largely unchanged from between 2.0 and 2.1. The thing that changed the most were box options, configurations, and packages and variables. And I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see changes in the CSS stuff as in 2.2, because I believe that he is going to want to recover his dream of dynamic CSS, and that's my own personal feeling about it. In the meantime, I will be creating my own sets of plugins to provide the opportunity for dynamic CSS and custom in Thesis 2.1 in a similar way to the way I did it in 1.8.5. And I will certainly make sure that that stuff continues to work in 2.2, even if packages evaporate. And because of that, that's my strategy, actually. Anytime now that I plan on writing, anything that's going to write custom CSS, I'm going to use a system similar to what I did in Thesis 1.8.5 until I'm sure that Thesis 2 has a system in place that's not going to have this kind of issue. But you know, upgrading is going to continue to be an issue, I would guess, in 2.2 as well. I don't know that for sure, and I might be wrong, but I'd like to think that 2.2 stuff will be backwardly compatible, but Chris has said that it's not going to support packages, so obviously it's not going to be compatible with what was done and what was built with packages in 2. So maybe by that time there'll be a way to upgrade better. Keith asks, can the classic responsive be set to full width? No, it cannot. I'm going to probably create a set of skin mods that are similar to for Thesis responsive classic, as I did for the standard Thesis classic, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet. But they will come along, and that skin mod will include a full width version of the skin. It probably will not include a 3-column version of the skin, because the way the skin is written, its automatic calculations of site width and column width and that kind of stuff is really dependent upon either being 1 column or 2 columns. So I don't think I'll be coming up with a 3-column skin mod for it. But current sites used agility and responsive menu style package. Will you have new upgraded way to handle? Of course, yeah. We will both be upgrading those, and we will have new ways of doing it. For example, the next upgrade of that menu plugin will copy all of your package settings and then move them out of the package and delete the package, because there's no reason for we're going to move away from the packages. So, but that will all happen for you without you having to do anything about it. So that kind of stuff is going to happen. Let's see. Is the new upgrade to WordPress 3.5.2 okay with Thesis? Yeah, I've tested it with all 3 versions of Thesis. That is 1.8, 2, and 2.1. It works just fine. Also works with just fine all versions of Genesis, 1.8, 1.9, and 2 beta 2. Do I have another site URL besides the test site that works in the Responsinator? Well, this site will work in the Responsinator. I mean, the one we just worked on, right? This is the one we just worked on, isn't it? Yeah, Thesis 2 demo. So the one I gave you earlier was Thesis 2 test.byob-tutorial.com. This is the Thesis 2 demo. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Beyond that, let's see. Jim asked, should they start using 2.1 beta? Yeah, I think so.